Hello, everyone. My name is Saurabh. Welcome to another episode of Freshly Pressed. Today we have with us Christof, the author of Requiem. Is it Requiem? Requiem? Yeah,
Yeah, Requiem.
Requiem. Yeah. Before we kick off, I would just like to do an acknowledgement of the country. I would like to acknowledge uh, elders of past, present, and future of a Cabrogal clan of Darug Nation, where I'm based, and Gadigal land, where Christop's based, probably. Yeah, let's move on from there. So, Christoph, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm freelance full time, so I had a bit of a sleep in, which was nice. I can't really complain.
Nice, nice. Tell us a bit about how you got into comics, and how writing piqued your interest, and
Yeah, of
bit of a
course.
history.
Yeah, for a long time, I think like a lot of comic creators, I started sort of doing reviews. So from like maybe probably around 2010, 2011, I started doing writing comic reviews. I had very terrible radio show on local radio in Hornsby where I lived at the time, and I just and I contributed articles for like Geek of Oz and Kapow, and just kind of that was kind of how I got started. And then I don't know at what point it switched, but at some point I kind of realized that I wanted to write my own stuff. Um, this was after I previously decided I wanted to make sort of reviewing and writing about comics my career, and then it kind of switched to wanting to write comics. And then in 2014, as part of my university course, I did a screenwriting subject, and that kind of changed everything for me in terms of I think a lot of people when they first start writing are kind of very, very ideas focused, or at least I was. So you're like, oh, I have this idea. This idea is really good. But any kind of professional writer knows that like ideas are a dime a dozen. What you really need to be focused on is execution. And I think
Hmm.
that screenwriting course, taught me through act structure, and I learned, and we had like a review process where we would get feedback from classmates and the instructor, and I learned so much about how to execute a good story and what's involved in that, and kind of the idea that oh, this is a learnt skill. Ideas obviously come and go, but the actual process of turning an idea into an outline, into in this case a screenplay or a comic strip, that is a learnt skill. And it was kind of from that point onwards that I really realized what was going to be involved to actually get good at this. So as part of that course, I wrote a 10-minute short film, and then but the intention of that was always to adapt it into a comic, which is what I did. And I joke a lot of the time. People generally write comics hoping to adapt them into films. I think I'm like the only person who wrote like a short film to be like, this is going to be a comic.
It's funny you said that because I think this was a couple of episodes ago that I actually interviewed someone who was similar to you. He got into screenwriting first, and then he translated that structure into comics. He's also a film school student, and things like that. So I have been hearing these things now quite often because translating from obviously we've seen translating from comics to screen, but now things are happening the other way around as well. So
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, particularly in Australia, right, is that as far as I know, we don't really have any kind of formal comics writing stuff as part of university. So, or as part of like higher education. There's just early again that I'm aware of. There is nothing for writers. So a lot of the time you're kind of making do, with screenwriting courses, and that's something I recommend to a lot of people, and particularly here in Australia. Is like there's not going to be comic writing stuff, so do a screenwriting course, learn 3X structure, learn how to write visually, and then afterwards, kind of pursue resources specific to comic writing.
absolutely, I think we were discussing this last week on. I don't know if you're part of the Australian Iteria Slack, sorry, Discord group.
Oh yes, yeah. I was previously. I've actually been. in a process of like very aggressively culling down the amount of discords I'm in, because otherwise I just can't keep up. So I'm only in, yeah, I kind of culled it down from a whole bunch too. I'm only in like two at the moment. So yeah,
Yeah.
but I was, yeah, previously in that Discord.
Yeah, we were actually discussing on that Discord about how Australia's art schools don't have a lot of like comic book focused courses. There are very few of them, and they're very few and far in between. You know, like there's literally just I think two universities in Australia that offer like an elective course in comic book making or drawing actually, and that's the art side of things. Especially when like comics is not considered very high art, and it's always
Mm.
frowned upon by most of the art elitists, most of the like art school people, and
Yeah,
um,
100%. I think there's that, and I think also like particularly, obviously comics covers a huge umbrella, right? And I think for a lot of, particularly in Australia, when there's educational materials around comics, a lot of the time, it is for writer artists, so people who draw their own stuff, and like so there's I believe it's the Milktooth in Perth, Milktooth Studio, that
mm,
do like a bunch of training stuff for comics people. It's great, but it is
mm,
focused around writer artists,
yeah,
and I think in Australia there's not really many resources that kind of deal with American comics, where you have the segmentation of labor, where it's like, this is what a comic writer does, this is what a penciler does, this is what an inker does, this is what a colorist does, this is what a letterer does. Like, we don't really have that here.
yeah, yeah,
And a lot of like the training I kind of seeked out when was starting was around like what specifically is involved in writing comic books, not just making comic books, but like what's the role of the writer,
mm,
and how do you write well? And there's not really anything in Australia that speaks to that for writers, or really any other things outside of just writer artists.
yeah, absolutely. Nice. So, did you go about like completely educating yourself on how comics are structured and written?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know there's a bunch of kind of conflicting thoughts. Like, some people kind of are like, just go in, make a comic. Other people are like, no, do your research, learn the form. I'm kind of in between, so I think make, but while you're making stuff, I was, also actively reading
Yeah,
resources for comic writing. So Jim Zub, his blog was a really, really, really good resource. I
yeah,
mean, I still refer to it from time to time. That was just, yeah.
same.
Jim, I think, was kind of one of the first people to really just start making a lot of resources and blog posts on like being a writer and what that was like, and instructional stuff on like pitches and scripting, and yeah, he was, I think, one of the first people to kind of do that online. And then the other thing that was a real game changer for me was Words for Pitches, which is a book by Brian Michael Bendis, which is excellent. That was really so helpful, and I recommend that
Yeah,
to all new writers.
nice.
Yeah, it just really, yeah, it's again, because it's by Bendis, it is aggressively tailored to like, this is how you write for, essentially, for like the big two, or this is how you write when you're the writer within
Yeah,
a bigger team of people, and it's
mm,
one of the few kind of resources I've encountered that really speaks to that.
yeah. No, that's amazing, and I also kind of followed a similar path when I first started writing. So when I wrote the first comic book, I actually did not know if it will even translate into a comic or not. I did go through a lot of online resources to see how comic scripts are structured, and things like that. And then like the doing part was actually applying for an anthology and actually like taking part in an anthology process to see like the whole process, how the whole process works with the artists coming in and doing their thing, and
Mm.
yeah, and with lettering and everything. I tried my hand on lettering as well, which was like quite amazing. Like it was pretty daunting at the start, but it
I,
was yeah,
totally. Yeah, because essentially, especially when you like read comics and you see good lettering, you're like, oh, it's just words on a page. How hard can it be? And when you actually try to do it yourself, you're like, oh my goodness, this is, yeah, just so insanely difficult to do well.
Absolutely. I think a good lettering can make or break a panel totally. Like if it's not done well, then it just takes the steam off that panel completely.
Oh, I
Yeah.
completely agree. And the thing I would also add to that is, the writer understanding what the letterer needs and how to enable good lettering. Often you'll see like this. Occasionally, I'll come across pages where there's just way too much words on the page, and the letterer is doing the best job they can, but the writer really needed to just cut down.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. But I completely agree. Lettering is so pivotal, and I think I definitely I've messed around with a little bit of lettering. One of my first anthologies, I lettered myself very badly, but it did the job. But I think it's such a good skill for new writers to, at least have a crack at lettering just so they can begin to understand what's involved.
Yeah. 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 There was, I think, a lot of and also on the other side of the story, there's a lot of like quiet panels with absolutely no letters that can make a huge impact as well.
100%.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, I no, I couldn't agree more. I'm a big believer in just like cutting stuff out, and I think a lot of the time, uh, you don't, if the art's doing its job, and you don't really need to, the art sells the emotion or the message. You don't need to add words.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Awesome. Tell us a bit about Requiem, and what's the story
Yeah,
behind it.
yeah, yeah. So Requiem is it's co-written by myself and David Hazan, who of course does Nottingham, and illustrated. The line art is by the incredible Phil Apley, um, with colors by Gonzalo Duarte, and then letters by Bram Meeham, edits by Chris Sanchez, and then our logo is by the amazing John Bedovian. But yeah, Requiem is a sci-fi horror story. We kind of pitch it as a kind of a grisly murder mystery in space, but the crew have all had their memory recently wiped. So that's kind of the really what the kind of the key thing of the book is. It's this is that the crew has to keep wiping their memory. They don't know why they have to do it, but they just know if they let their sort of long term memory establish too much, something really really bad is going to happen. And that's kind of the at the core of the book is like why aren't they allowed to remember and what happens when they do?
Interesting.
Yeah, so we kind of pitch it as like Event Horizon meets Memento. Um,
It did remind me of Event Horizon. I was like,
yeah,
I don't see that name in the list, but it does remind me of Event Horizon a fair bit. You've listed a few movies. It's like Alien, The Thing. Oh yeah, oh I completely missed Event Horizon, but it did remind me of that. Yes, yeah,
oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, so yeah, so it's kind of I think like I mean all sci-fi horror to an extent I think references Alien. It's the OG in a lot of ways. But I think what we really wanted to channel was the idea of the story is quite small in scope. There's a small crew. There's only six characters, uh, and because it's horror, obviously not everyone's going to survive. Um, but yeah, it's a small crew, but we kind of wanted the consequences to feel big. So their decisions and their actions are going to have a huge effect on like the universe, but the actual kind of scope and crew is really quite small. It's mainly contained to one ship and there's six characters.
nice, nice. That's amazing. It always feels, and I can see that there's some sort of, because it's based on a space station. It has sense of that claustrophobia, and
Yeah, 100%.
all those kind of factors playing in as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's kind of something that Dave and me have kind of been playing around with, and we'll see in other issues. Is obviously it's confined to one spaceship, but trying to keep it visually interesting is super important to us. So making sure that the different areas of the spaceship that serve different functions have a completely different kind of visual feel. So in issue two, we introduced the biodome, which is this kind of lush garden essentially on the ship, and obviously that's super different to anything else we've kind of seen
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
first issue.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm definitely very looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Sorb. I so appreciate that.
There's very few times you get like such really solid campaigns from Australia, especially, like, and you have to get behind that. So,
Thank you, mate.
um,
Yeah, I definitely think here, like what we were mentioning before about like the limited talent pool can be a real issue when you're trying to make comics in Australia. I mean, for me, I always just reach out overseas. I don't, just I'm obviously very open to working with Australians and want to, but a lot of the time the talent pool for specific kind of skill sets just isn't here.
absolutely, no, that makes sense. But yeah, how was collaborating with David? Because he's amazing. I
Yeah.
just
Yeah, he's a good dude. Yeah, so Dave and I have known each other since 2019. I reached out to him over Twitter. I thought he was working in the US market. And at the time, he was living in Sydney, the city where I live. So I reached out. We had dinner, and we just kind of been good friends ever since. Um, and yeah, Requiem. So we've wanted to work together for a while now, and it started with us pitching, funnily enough, Aftershock before they filed for bankruptcy. We were pitching them a bunch of stuff, and nothing really got through to the point where we were, their suggestion was, hey, don't like flesh the pitch out too much, just give us like a paragraph. So we were just sending them like pages of paragraph pitches. Anyway, one of them was Requiem, and we'd kind of discussed it and sort of played around with the idea, and so we sent it through to them, and I didn't really. They were kind of interested, but it didn't super a click for them. So we kind of, you know, we were like, well, what do we want to do with it? We knew we wanted to make it, and we kind of didn't want to have to go through the pitching process again. So then we found Phil on Twitter, tweeting about how he was looking for like Kickstarter projects and was particularly interested in like horror and sci-fi horror. And we're like, perfect.
nice.
Yeah, so we reached out to Phil, and as soon as we started talking with Phil, it
Yeah,
changed from like it being a pitch to like, no, we're going to do it, and we'll do it through Kickstarter.
that's amazing. It's amazing. No, I think, and like crowdfunding is obviously one of the key aspects to bringing your projects to life these days, right? Like with there's a lot of like activity on social media that you can harness, and a lot of horror fans that you can reach. The one good thing about indie comics though is you can break certain rules around, like you don't need your comic, because mainstream comics are so tied into like superheroes and those kind of genres. We can have, like, in indie comics you can make something that's completely focused on a certain genre and things that you like and stuff like that, and also in like just infuse a bit of like pop culture into it, and those
Yeah,
kind of
no,
things. Yeah,
100%. And I think we found, yeah, the experience really freeing because, again, we've been able to, like, so we brought, Chris Sanchez in as our editor because had worked with him. David had worked with him over at Mad Cave and really liked working with him. And obviously, you don't, if you're at a publisher, you get the editor that you're assigned. So being able to pick the whole team, even the editor, and just have full control over everything has been really wonderful. And again, saying before is not having to worry about like how do we communicate this as a pitch. We can just focus on, well, how do we pull it off as a story.
yeah. No, that's quite liberating, though it does come with with the caveat that you have to do the fulfillment yourself.
Yeah, well, so that's a funny thing. I'm sure you've encountered this with other people doing Kickstarter from Australia, but where for the US and the UK, for the UK, Phil is going to fulfill the pledges because that's where he lives. He's in Scotland, and then for the US, we're bringing on a fulfillment partner. That just because unfortunately, shipping is just too expensive from here.
Yeah. Also, you're shipping directly from the United States, is it?
Yeah, yeah. So we've got a fulfillment partner, So the downside of that meant that our Australian fulfillment or Australian shipping is a little bit pricey. But the nice thing about Australians is they're pretty tolerant and understand, and we're used to paying more for shipping. Whereas, Americans in the US get so upset if it's over, if it's over $5. It's
Yeah.
quite it just makes it really hard when you're trying to fulfill from Australia.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. I know somebody who was trying to do that. Um, there was this campaign I funded a while ago, and poor guy, like he tried his best to actually fulfill the campaign from Australia. He had so many dealers from Australia Post. Yeah, massive problems with that. And it was so expensive. It was at the end not even worth like running that campaign because he ran out of most of the funds because of
Yeah.
the fulfillment process. Yeah.
Oh God, I can imagine. Yeah, no, it's just yeah, it's one of the many challenges of trying to kind of make comics from here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, cool. What I usually ask this to everyone.
Yeah.
What's your like top five pop culture, like favorite pop culture things?
Oh,
I'll just put it
interesting.
very loosely because like it could be movies or
Yeah.
TV shows or you know.
Oh, I love that. Let me have a think. Hmm, God, that's so I think up there for me is God, this is probably a weird one, but I love the Men in Black films. I just think they're so good, and I hate that there hasn't been a good one in a while.
Yeah,
Obviously there was Men in Black International, which just didn't quite hit for me.
no, no, not really. Men in Black 3 was actually quite decent.
Oh yeah, I really liked Men in Black 3. I thought it was,
Mm.
a good film. I don't understand why it got some of the hate it did.
No, Jermaine Clement was pretty good as the villain.
Oh, I love that. He was great. I just loved to me it just yeah, I just love the way that the Men in Black universe like treats aliens and kind of just, and just the other thing I love is, in every Men in Black movie, the stakes are always the world.
Yeah,
That's always the stakes, and they that remains consistent. Yeah, and they just yeah,
yeah. It
I
almost
think
feels like a parody, at like the with the stakes being always being the world, right? Like,
totally
yeah, yeah,
yeah, to me it rides such a fine line between like, you know, because it is an action comedy. It rides such a fine line between being serious and just being ridiculous. And it
yeah.
somehow manages to pull it off. And I just outside of the films, and then there was a cartoon in the was it the 90s, either the 90s or early 2000s. There hasn't really been any Men in Black media.
No,
Obviously it was actually based on a comic, but the comic is drastically like the movie really is its own thing in terms of like it kind of took the very kind of base concept of the comic and just went in a completely different direction, both tonally and in terms of what it deals with. But yeah, I would love to see more Men in Black, like stuff. I think it's such a good idea and a fun idea.
I know. I really like the direction they went with the movie because I think comics are quite serious and they're
Hmm,
fine. You know, they're not. I'm not saying they're bad in any way, but they're quite serious. And just to translate that to the screen in like when the movie was originally produced at that time, it would have been possible. You know, so they did
totally.
the best they could with like just making it. They knew that it's going to be a bit silly and goofy and just just playing with that, having fun with that was actually a great thing. Plus, like the leads are charming. Will Smith is incredibly charming in the movie, so it's
100%.
yeah.
I mean, that's why I also wonder in terms of them being able to make more. Uh, if that's part of it as well. As obviously the cast is pretty stacked, and getting Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones back, I could imagine could be quite challenging. Given
Yeah. Oh, Josh Brolin as Tommy Lee Jones was hilarious.
was so good. Yeah, that one again, amazing casting.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Cool. What about others?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. Look, outside of that, I've this is a newer love of mine, but I recently got into played the remake of Dead Space, and that's just a world that I just want to spend more time in. And that's God, I love how it does cosmic horror.
Mm,
Because the obviously with Dead Space, it feels very like hard sci-fi in a lot of ways. Like when you're on the USG Ishimura, everything is kind of feels very planned out. All the different parts of the ship have a clear function. It's hard sci-fi, but then with the necromorphs and their kind of origins and the markers, it brings in, obviously like the horror and almost a supernatural element, but it never feels like it strays too much outside of hard sci-fi. Like it kind of balances that line, and I just love that. Um, and
Nice.
yeah, I just think it's such a so I think at the time it was really groundbreaking, and even now
Mm.
playing the remake, I'm like, if this came out as its own thing now, I would think it was brilliant. It's just such a great game and such a compelling world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice.
Um, and again, the kind of thing where like obviously there's a lot going on in Dead Space, in terms of like the world building and the stuff with the markers and the necromorphs, but again, the actual like story is about Isaac trying to find his girlfriend. That's it's a very grounded story and a very
Mm.
personal story, and there's all the other stuff going on. But at the end of the day, like even though like the future of humanity is at stake, what you really kind of care about is Isaac finding his girlfriend. And that's kind of, and I just love that. And to me, that's such good sci-fi horror. You have the big stakes, but you also have the really real grounded stakes that people can relate.
Yeah, yeah. No, that definitely adds an edge to the story, right? Like
one Hundred percent.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And I
No,
think that particularly with horror, or at least the way Dave and I approach it in Requiem and just in general, is coming at it from a grounded place. I think the older you get, the more your fears and the things I worry about are really really grounded. Obviously, as a kid, you worry about monsters under the bed and threats that aren't really a threat. But as you get older, the things I worry about are like losing my memory, or like getting sick, or something terrible happening to someone I love. That kind of becomes the things you worry about. So
yeah,
it's I think it's they become such fertile grounds to kind of explore horror from. And like again with
absolutely.
Dead Space, we all, it's relatable. It's super relatable to know what it's like to have a maybe a partner in like a job that's dangerous or toxic for them, or that means that you can't spend as much time with them as you want. Like all that stuff is so relatable.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then it just
Makes
kind of
sense.
obviously spirals out from there to in horrific proportions. But like, yeah, it starts as something so grounded.
No, that's amazing. Cool. Awesome. Any comics you think?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I'll probably do the next two together if that's cool. But the next two are Chew, which I've talked about a little bit previously, and then Resident Alien. Um, so Chew, I just love because it's batshit insane.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read it, Sora, but it is buck wild. Yeah. So it's
Okay.
basically the premise is it kind of starts with the premise of this guy who has the ability of when he eats something, he basically gets a psychic impression of its like memories. So if he like
Oh,
eats like if he eats like human flesh, he can like figure out how someone was killed. And it starts. That's kind of where it starts, and it starts quite gritty, and then it just goes insane because as the world expands, you meet all these other characters that have food-based powers. So the whole
wow.
world is full of people who have like yeah really some of them very specific food based powers. So there's like a guy who can make like functional weapons out of chocolate, and that's his power. And and it's just
Wow.
yeah, and again the world gets batshit insane, but the actual kind of the grounded emotion of the story
Yeah,
is very relatable and very grounded. But yeah, the actual like that's just an insane story and so fun. The premise is buck wild, and I just don't think I think with I know they were looking at like doing a series, which was going to be animated, but I just don't think the thing I love about Chew is like you couldn't do it live action. Like it
yeah,
has to
yeah.
be either a comic or a cartoon, in my opinion. And even then, I don't know if the cartoon could fully sort of balance the craziness of it all
Mm,
while it's
mm.
still feeling not too absurd and insane.
Well, I think cartoons do have license to go like completely insane. I don't know if have you seen Devilman Crybaby,
Yes,
the
yeah, I watched
remake
that
on
too.
Netflix? Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah,
God.
yeah.
Yeah.
That that yeah, that show is my quad. I was talking to someone about that the other day and just how insane that is.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think part of it as well is like in terms of comics and animation, I think there's a big difference between what a line looks like written down on the page as opposed to like spoken by a voice actor. You know, even though obviously when you read a line in a comic book, you're reading it out loud in your head, but that's it just plays differently, you know, when a writer is when sorry, an actor is reading it. And I definitely think,
absolutely.
you know, that there is dialogue that looks great on the comic book page that would sound really clunky
I
you
agree.
know, in person and vice versa. You know, often really naturalistic dialogue doesn't, or at least from my experience, it can be quite hard to make really naturalistic dialogue work on a comic book page.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's also, I think I was reading this thread on Twitter, and I was like, somebody was had mentioned this earlier as well, that comics doesn't really have like a post-production process as well, you know. So that's why a lot of times, like even the best of like the most well-formed comics sometimes have like clunky dialogue,
Totally.
or yeah, maybe like sometimes some things don't flow that naturally because we don't have the liberty of like uh rewriting stuff when the artwork's done. Or like,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, especially with schedules a lot of the time, you know, obviously like in a perfect world, you know, you have a little bit of time to tweak the dialogue when you can actually see how it looks on the page, but you don't always get that, particularly, you know, some at some of these publishers with tight turnarounds where it's the final, you know, filtering layer is the editor who has a bunch of projects, they're underpaid, they're stressed out, like, you know, it's not, yeah, it's easy for things to be missed.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
Cool. Sorry, you were
Yeah,
saying?
and then just with Resident Alien, have yeah, I don't know if you've read that or not,
I
but
haven't read that either. No.
it's look, it's great, very so different to Chew. Whereas Chew kind of starts at a where Chew starts at like a grounded concept and just explodes out. Resident Alien starts with like a sci-fi concept, you know, and then but keeps it incredibly grounded.
Yeah.
So it follows an alien. We never actually learn his real name, but he on Earth he goes by Harry, and basically he's stuck on Earth, um, and he can't get in contact with his people. He doesn't have nefarious intents. He just kind of was in the area studying Earth, and his spaceship crashed. So he basically now has to live on Earth and is just solve small town mysteries to stop himself from getting bored. And that's kind of like that's the premise, and
That's
like
so good.
and the mechanic, you know, is that like he has basically psychic powers that mean that people perceive him the way he wants to be perceived. So
Mm.
so basically the people in the town he appears human, but he's drawn as an alien. So he's like an alien in like a plaid shirt, you know, just in a cafe,
Nice.
and no one's paying attention to him. So visually, it's really cool what they've done, and it's just a really wholesome story. Like it just I love it because it feels like slipping into a warm bath. I mean, they get into it a little bit the stuff about like the government finding out that an alien crashed and stuff, but for the most part, the stories are, you know, like small town crime capers. Like that's what
Yep.
they are, and the stakes are really small, you know, and it's really character focused, and it's yeah, it's just really lovely.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
and throughout the story, you're kind of watching Harry, who starts very kind of like he's never, you know, cruel or dismisses humans, but he just kind of is detached and doesn't
Mm.
really have any connections in this world. And as the story goes on, he begins to kind of form relationships, and it becomes, you know, it's a really beautiful story.
Nice. Nice. It does sound really interesting. Can you send links to that?
Of course, yeah,
Yeah,
happily,
I
yeah.
was just yeah,
So,
love
yeah,
to.
so it's published by Dark Horse, and I believe they're still making it. Like they've, I'm a little bit behind. I need to catch up, but it's yeah, it's one of my probably like one of my all time favorite comics. It's just effortlessly charming and wonderful to read. And again,
Nice.
because of what you know, obviously there is a. I was about to say it can't be adapted, but there is a Resident Alien TV show, but it's so different to the comic. You know,
Hmm.
it's a completely different beast.
That's what I thought when you mentioned Resident Alien because I know that there's a TV show that yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the TV show, he was like he's on Earth to like invade, you know, and that where that
Hmm.
is not the case in the book. And I think why that works for the TV show, it feels like what we're talking about with Men in Black, where like it took a little bit like some of the premise and kind of went in its own direction. Whereas yeah, the comic is a completely different beast. And I don't. But here's the thing, like because the stakes are so low, deliberately, I don't think that would I think it would be really hard to sell it as a TV show, as it is, as a comic is. So that's one of the things I love about it is
Yeah,
you read it, you're like, oh, this can only really be a comic. Like this is what it is.
yeah. And in 2023, maybe they can make like a True Detective show with Resident Alien.
That
Who
would be
knows?
rad. But even then, again, it's not that yeah, the stakes are never that high, and it never gets that gritty either.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
again,
yeah,
it wouldn't really work for TV, but it's part of the comic's charm, I think.
yeah, absolutely. Cool. We're coming to time, but before we go, are there any like special rewards that you're offering on your campaign? And give us a rundown of the rewards and
Yeah, 100%.
take it away for like 5 minutes
Yeah, I
about
would
your
love to.
comics.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think, particularly with comics Kickstarters, it's easy to get carried away with extravagant rewards, T-shirts and other different pieces of merch. And I'm not saying that that's like a bad thing, but that's just not what we wanted to do. For us, we wanted to make it really comic focused. Um, so basically all the reward tiers are based around you get the comic and you get a little mini print that's exclusive to the Kickstarter. So we've got that. We've got three variants. One by Shane Connery Volk, who's the artist on Nottingham. One by Liana Kangas, who as most people know who she is. She's an amazing superstar artist
she's
growing
amazing.
up.
Yeah,
Um, but she's done Star Trek, Star Wars, and then Archie. Just to name a few of the things that she's done recently.
awesome.
Sorry, we just had a package arrive.
That's all right.
Yeah. So, and then obviously we've got the Scarlet Partridge variant, which we haven't released yet. We're really last I checked, we're at like 99. So by the time this comes out, it'll be released, and I just urge people to check it out. It's so good. I'm
Nice.
obsessed with it. And in terms of other rewards, something that was probably of interest to a lot of people is that we have a few copies of Nottingham One that we're offering in some of the higher reward tiers. So it's the first printing, and it'll be signed by Dave. And I know those are really hard to come by and can often sell for a lot online. So this is your chance to be able to get one for the collectors out there. That's definitely one of the I think one of the probably the more collector focused rewards we've gotten. And then
Nice.
outside of that, obviously you can get we've got some tiers with commissions from Phil. We've also got a tier we're really excited about called the Ultimate Creator Pack, which is kind of based around obviously you get the Requiem comic and all the variants, but then you also get a Skype session with myself, Dave, and Phil. You get a script review by me, Dave, and Phil, and then also Phil will draw your comic cover for you. So he'll do the inks for your comic cover. Um, so that was really important to us, obviously, because we know a lot of aspiring creators and other Kickstarter creators, are the people who back Kickstarter. So we wanted to kind of give rewards focus to them, and in terms of the script review, we also wanted to keep it quite, accessible.
Yeah,
So we've also, as well as it being part of one of our higher reward tiers, it's also available just as an add-on as well. And again, the idea is that I just really wanted to make that accessible to creators, and who may not have heaps of money, but are able, but want to kind of seek out guidance from two working comic creators.
that's awesome. No, these are some really creative records and rewards, and like it's amazing that like you've kept it within the realm of comics, and
Totally,
yeah,
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 yeah. That was so important to us to keep it focused around, around the comic.
yeah. No, that's amazing, and yeah, thank you for coming on the show, and
Well, thank you so much for
really
having me.
appreciate it. It's always great to meet other fellow creators from Australia, and getting to hear their stories. So yeah, everyone, please do check out Requiem issue one. See, I got the pronunciation by the end of this call, so yeah, yeah, do check it out on Kickstarter, fund it, back it, get all those amazing variant covers, and if you want to meet the creators, go on one of the higher tiers and get it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
See ya.